Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
A very good morning, good evening, good afternoon, my dear friends. Welcome back to this Total Quality Management course, and I am Raghunandan Sengupta from IIT Kanpur, and this is the 8th lecture. So, in the 7th lecture, we were discussing in details the overall framework, how quality could be brought into the system. So, that was basically known as the 5 steps of solving approach for quality. So, I was just discussing the first pillar, which is basically defined, but considering the time duration for the last lecture was already over. So, hence I had to cut short the deliverance, for which I apologize. So, I will start off afresh with full enthusiasm the discussion of the 5 steps for problem solving approach for quality. So, to just rehash the main bullet points based on which we will discuss, the DMAIC DMAIC steps are define, measure, analyze, improve and control. So, the objectives for define opportunities are identify and or validate the business improvement opportunity. So, as I said in the last few seconds of the last class, so depending on how you have been able to pass on the overall benefit which you are going to get to the customers. So, whatever benefit which you get, you try to define that whether those quality improvements are necessary. You try to basically buy new machineries, give good training to your workmen for either manufacturing goods or training, try to implement good raw materials, try to basically have a good lighting system, try to have a cleanliness in your workforce, in your layout, whatever it is, have a good relationship with the vendor, have a very good relationship with the retailer or the distributor who is going to basically distribute your products, and so on and so forth. So, you defined, continuing with the discussions on undefined, you define critical customer requirements, what do the customers want. You document or map the whole overall process, and that how the general production or the service process starting from your end till the customer end, it is mapped. Rather than going into details of the technical one, you basically try to understand what are the flow process based on which the products are utilized at your end, made into finished goods, and basically through the distributors, through the channels supplied to the customer. You establish the overall concept based on which you are going to implement that work, consider it as a project, and have a very core team who really believes in the philosophy. But having said that, if you remember, I did mention that quality should basically be a top down approach. That means, the philosophy of the people who are running the show, who are running the company, whether the manufacturing one or the services one, should basically have inside them the belief that quality is and should be an integral part of the overall process, and they should be in a position that the enthusiasm should percolate from the top level to the bottom level. So, the people feel that quality is important, they should be enthusiastic about that and should be in a position to improve the overall process of manufacturing or the services. Having defined, you basically measure the performance. So, the objectives of measure and performance are determine what is to be measured. Is it basically you want to measure the parts per million defective which is coming out? Are you interested to measure the overall tolerance level which you give for your products, or are you interested to measure the level of time you are willing to give for yourself to deliver the services to the customer? So, consider that many of the delivery products of food, they say that you will get your products within half an hour. So, that may be a motto based on which you are trying to render services to your customers. So, then you understand and try to study how the management of the measurements of the data collection should be done. So, you need to basically collect data based on which you can say that how the measurements have been done and whether the measurements which you are trying to do would have an implication when you do a detailed analysis, and it would basically lead to quality improvements. You will develop and validate the measurement systems based on which you are trying to study, and you will determine the sigma performance level, whether to a level of plus minus 1 sigma or plus minus 2 sigma or plus minus 3 sigma, based on which you will try to implement what is actually practically possible based on the overall motivation level which you have. Then you will try to basically analyze. So, objectives under analyze would be analyze the data to understand reasons for variations and identify the problems where they are occurring. So, the problem may be the coolant which you are trying to use may be bad, or the overall workmanship is bad, or the training of the workman is not good, or whether the humidity in the shop floor is very high, which has a negative implication for the raw materials which are may be very sensitive to humidity, or say for example, the temperature may be high, or there may be a lot of dust particles in the shop floor, or say for example, it may happen the raw materials which are being supplied are not of good quality. So, consider you are getting copper. So, the copper may be not of high quality. So, there may be impurities which may have a negative effect on your overall production process and the raw materials you are going to utilize to manufacturing the finished goods. You find out the root causes where the problem is occurring, then you determine the process capability, throughput and the cycle time. So, what is the cycle time, what is the production rate per hour, per week, per month, and what effect it does it have if you try to basically implement quality to a higher level. Obviously, initially it would have a detrimental effect and try to reduce the throughput, but obviously that should be compensated with better quality. So, you will have to basically make a study of all those things. You formulate the investigation process and verify the root causes of the hypothesis based on which you are going to implement quality. Then we come to the second last stage of in the 5-step problem solving approach, which is improve. So, objectives under improve would be generate and quantify the potential solution. So, what are the solutions would be? Do you think that the workers should be given training? Do you think better coolant should be used? Do you think the raw material should be purchased from a second vendor, or do you think the vendors can be basically trained in order to supply the same goods, or do you think basically you are able to purchase good quality raw materials at a higher cost? So, all these things you have to consider in details, or do you think, say for example, the overall supply chain needs to be improved. So, based on that you take a decision. You evaluate and select the final solution which is best for your case, considering quality, considering cost, considering workmanship, considering the overall infrastructure which you have. You verify and gain approval for the final solution from all the persons who are there as the implementation stage, starting from the raw material purchase till the delivery of goods, because the workman, the accountant, the vendor, the marketing person, the workman who is basically studying the quality, everybody should be in the same frequency, that their main motivation is to improve quality, but obviously they would have a different implication for each of them. So, how it can be done? Everybody's thought process should be considered very rationally, very scientifically, such that the overall process improves. And then you come to after the final solution and the approval of the final solution have been done, then you basically come to the last step, which is the control step, and the objectives under the control steps are develop the ongoing process management plan. So, it is basically implementable cycle after cycle. So, mistake and proof process are in the schedule in the sense they should be there, so that people if some mistakes occur, how they can be rectified. Then you monitor the and control the critical processes which are happening, and basically take a very minute study that what are the critical processes, how they affect the overall production, how they affect the overall services, how quality can be affected, and you basically you make a detailed study of that. Then the last stage would be develop an out of control action plans in case, if for example, the overall process is going out of control. So, obviously, there would be some reasons. So, you have to analyze that what may be the actual reason based on which this is happening, and you should be able to analyze and go back that how remedial steps can be taken in order to bring the overall process back into action. So, the structured problem solving another DMAIC steps, as I discussed. If I go into more details, it would be DMAIC is a structured problem solving methodology that can be used for cycle time reduction, throughput improvements, and so on and so forth. So, each stage is followed by a toll gate. That means, you basically implement that, analyze at the level of decision whether things are going as a plan, whether improvements have occurred, and if not, try to basically give some feedback based on which you are able to rectify the problems which you think are important and need to be looked into. So, evaluation after completion of a particular stage is basically to ensure the project is on track and allow suggestions for modifications, and if modifications are needed, you basically implement that accordingly. This 5-step problem basically uses a small set of powerful tools that can be specifically applied to each of the steps. So, the steps are, there is a cause and effect, and obviously, if there is a cause and effect, you measure what are the cause, what are the effects, and try to basically quantify them and bring into the notice of the people who are involved in that process, such that they can give you the right decisions, right information, right knowledge, right set of suggestions based on which you can improve and measure the cause and effect, and basically try to take corrective actions for the cause and what are the effects on the effect. Then comes the process capability analysis, and you measure that. So, that is the thing which I have been discussing about. Use the standard statistical process control tools, the normal distributions and the other distributions, and what are the charts, X bar charts, R charts, P charts, so on and so forth. Then obviously, you have some hypothesis testing to be done. So, the hypothesis testings are done in such a way that they will give you some information that the test which you have implemented are basically as per the norm, and whether the hypothesis based on which you had actually started to work on improving the overall level of work concept in the shop floor or in the services sector, wherever you want to implement the concept of quality, whether that really makes sense. In the defined stage, considering for the 5 steps of quality improvement approach. So, the objective is to identify and validate a project opportunity. Project means you are trying to understand the overall implementation from the project point of view. So, project must be important to customers as well as to the business. So, obviously, when I am trying to implement a project on a detailed scale, project means I am trying to implement or improve the quality. It should have a positive consequence for the customers, and obviously, it should have a positive consequence for the business also. So, it does not mean that I am going to give the best quality to customers, but at my end, if the costs are very high, it does not basically make any sense. So, I have to basically be rational. So, the project charters are to be prepared, which would basically be the business case, and under that you will basically have the business, and this project supports the business quality goals, which are basically to be implemented. Then you have the goal statement, then you have the project plan, and on the opportunity statement would be an opportunity to exist to close the gap between the customer expectation and our actual performance, what we are able to deliver. The project scope would basically have the overall response time which is measured from the recipient of a product returned to the time that either the customer has the product replaced or the customer is reimbursed if there is problem. And obviously, there would be team which would consist of the team sponsor or team leader or team members who are in a position to implement the overall concept. So, even though I may be skimming the overall all writing which is there in the slide, but I will strongly urge the participants, the students basically to have a look at the book, and trust me, the book Montgomery has a lot of information. So, what I am trying to give you is basically a feel that quality is important and how it can be done. So, both quantitatively as well as qualitatively. So, I tried to the maximum possible extent as possible to blend a balance between quantity and concept, and as well as the qualitative concept. Quantitative means in a way that what are the tools which you are going to utilize, and qualitative means how you are trying to basically analyze the problem in a much bigger scale and try to basically build the concept of quantity in each one of the steps such that they give you some information how quality can be improved. So, when you come to the graphical understanding of the flow process in the Speacock diagram, so they would be what are those the tools or the concepts which are important, and what are the nodes in the diagram are suppliers, the inputs, the process, the outputs, and the customer. So, obviously, suppliers means the vendors who are supplying goods to you, and then those inputs would be the raw materials, would be the coolants, would be say for example, type of services which I am getting from the vendor if I am trying to basically offload the production to the vendors or the subcontractors. So, and obviously, there would be a process based on which the raw materials are collected, they are processed and they are manufactured. Then I have basically the output, and the output goes into the customers. So, if I consider the overall the supplies, input, process, output and customers from the point of view of say for example, Starbucks or a provider of services which is basically coffee. So, it would basically have the utility company who provides the electricity, the water, the goods which are to be add on in order to basically make my overall service or product which I want to basically give to the customer. So, the inputs would be the ground coffee which I am getting, the water, the filter, the electricity. Then the actual process would be I collect the materials from the vendors, brew the coffee, pour coffee from the pot and basically give it to the customer. So, actually output should be hot, tasty, of the correct quality depending on the taste of the customers, and the customers are basically the consumers who come and buy the product or the service. So, again this diagram as I am mentioning has been taken from Montgomery. So, continuing the discussion, the action plan from moving forward to other steps would be basically they should be a tentative timeline, individual work assignment should be very specifically mentioned. The reviews which happen at the toll gate are, we will try to basically answer, are the stakeholders identify, what are the basic points based on which the stakeholder would analyze the problem, what are their problems which are they can face, what is the level of quality conscious they are to them which are the stakeholders of the customers, to them what is the actual concept of quality, what do they think the quality is it something to do with the product, is it something to do with the price, it is something to do with the services. So, you have to basically as the provider of the goods, provider of the the services, we have to basically analyze from the point of view of the customers, not from your point of view. So, we will also try to review, is the symptom appropriately being focused. So, if customers are complaining that the products are not being supplied right on time. So, we will try to analyze that whether is it basically specific to a customer or is it basically a general inherent negative point in the overall supply chain management. So, in that case, in the first case if it is very specific to few customers with respect to the second point which is a very general symptom in the overall supply chain process as you supply the goods. So, now obviously, you have to analyze the problem which is poor delivery, late delivery of the goods or the services to customer from two points of view. If it is specific, then you basically concentrate on that particular node of the supply chain and try to analyze the problem accordingly. If it is very generic, obviously, you have to basically do a much more thorough understanding of the overall supply chain and what is the problem the customers are facing. So, when you want to basically come to the concept of measurement of the actual concept which we discuss in the 5-step process. So, this step would basically involve a collection of the data relating to the quality. So, what we mean by quality? Is it something to do with texture? Is it something to do with taste? Is it something to do with weight? Is it something to do with color? So, that has to be understood in a very specific manner. So, there would be cost, there would be throughput times. So, all these things have to be analyzed. So, develop a list of key process input variables and key process output variables. So, what are the key processes based on which you can analyze the product, the services, the inputs with respect to the key process outputs. So, you basically should have a thorough understanding what are the inputs and what are the output based on which you are trying to understand and study the whole process in details. Data collected tells us about the current state of baseline or the business which you are trying to do and how the process works. So, it is important to measure the capability of measurement systems using tool gauge or repeatability on reproducibility should be there. So, if I am trying to measure the overall length, measure the overall height, measure the weights. So, I should be in a position such that I keep measuring it without any much of variance. Obviously, there would be white noise which is in variance coming out from outside, which is not under our control, but we should be in a position to measure the quality characteristics based on which you are trying to implement your overall process. Data collected can be displayed in form of Pareto charts. So, what are Pareto charts? I will come to that later on, and histogram. So, if you remember, I did mention when we are considering the concept of PDF, PNF and the CDF, I did discuss the PDF and PMF with respect to the CDF value. So, how the histograms can be plotted and which looks like a normal distribution, if you remember, I did mention that. So, that would only be applicable in the case if you have a huge amount of samples and try to basically plot the histogram. So, as per the concept of central limit theorem. So, obviously, I am using this concept of central limit theorem for the first time, we will see that later also, that as per the concept of central limit theorem, many of the distributions which we will try to implement can be converted into a very simple case of normal distribution. So, if needed, project charter to be updated and team makeup to be reevaluated. So, that means in case the histogram, the Pareto diagrams are giving us some other informations, we may need to basically have a relook at the team who are there, team members who are there, and try to either give them training or basically reshuffle the team in order to actually see to the point that the basic idea of quality improvement which is there in the overall process is an integral part of the overall system. So, the toll gate review happens such that all assumptions made for the data collections are basically analyzed and understood, and we complete the process of the flow chart such that the flow chart gives us along with the diagrams gives a good understanding how the overall process is being implemented from the vendor side to our side and from our side to basically the distributors and finally from the distributors to the customers. In the analysis phase, which I did discuss earlier on in the 5 steps of improvement. So, the objective is to use data collected from previous steps to understand cause and effect relationship and to identify sources of variability which may be there. So, main aim is to identify sources of common cause and assignable causes. Several tools are used in these steps which are control charts to separate common cause from assignable cause. Hypothesis testing are done based on the fact that what should be actually the overall study. So, if I hypothesize that some process capability are shifting, or say for example, the temperature is shifting, or say for example, the length of the tie rod is shifting, or say for example, the overall brittleness of a product is shifting. So, all this concept should basically be hypothesized such that I basically collect the data, use that in the implementation stage such that using very simple statistical rule I am able to either prove or disprove my hypothesis based on which some corrective actions if needed can be taken. So, continuing that, hypothesis testing and confidence interval estimation to determine if different conditions of operation procedures statistically give different results. So, obviously, we will try to collect the data and try to prove or disprove this fact. And then regression analysis can also be utilized to model dependent and independent variables such that they can be implementable in the actual process. So, obviously, we would not be going to such details for the regression analysis, but we will definitely go into the concept of hypothesis testing and how the different type of statistical process control tools are utilized. So, continuing the analysis concept. So, under the analysis we have the failure mode and effective analysis process is there, which is basically used to prioritize different sources of errors, variability or failure according to, like say for example, the likelihood that something will go wrong would basically be ranked from a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being say for example not likely and 10 being say for example almost certain, or say for example the ability to detect a defect or defect is there or a failure is there or an error is there, and we basically again rank them from a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being very likely, 10 being very unlikely. Or say for example, we try to bring into the analysis of the failure modes would be the severity of a failure defect or a failure or an error, again from a rank from 1 to 10. So, when 1 basically is the scale for little impact and 10 being the scale for extreme impact. So, this 1 to 10 scale which I am mentioning basically gives you a level of importance to that level or to that metric which you are going to study, and how it can be basically categorized from the very good to the very bad or very very problematic one for the one which are not at all that problematic. The 3 scores are multiplied to obtain a risk priority number. So, these levels which I have, the likelihood, the ability, the severity, basically they are scaled down in such a way that you basically are able to understand on this each scale what is the level of importance you are going to place on this level of defect, which or level of severity of defect, or say for example the ability to detect a failure. So, how good and bad this overall thing is there on a one to one basis. The toll gate review basically understands what opportunities are there to be targeted for investigations based on the detailed studies, and while the investigation of these opportunities helped us to get or basically have the overall desired outcome based on which we are trying to analyze the overall process for the production of the services which you are going to render. So, in the improve one or improve concept of analysis for the points of discussion for quality improvements would be creative thinking to basically understand the specific change that can be made in the process should be analyzed, and then we basically redesign the process to eliminate bottlenecks and reduce the weights, which should definitely be a overall important factor when we are going to consider that. So, then the third one would be basically to develop a solution and do a pilot study for the project and how this can be implemented. And in the toll gate review again we basically analyze adequate documentation is done, results of pilot test including data displays analysis, equipment, experimental and simulation analysis are done, and plan to implement the test pilot test on a full scale basis should be implementable in the toll gate review stage. And finally, the analysis of any risk of implementing the solution and appropriate risk management plans should definitely be implementable. In the control stage, we have objective is to complete all remaining projects and to hand off the improved process to the owner along with the process control plan. Then we have the process owner should be provided with before and after data on key processes. Control charts are important, such the statistical tool are utilized in the control step of DMAIC, and the toll gate review, which is basically the review would be a summary of the lessons learned from the project should be available. Data illustrating that before and after results are in line with the project chapter should be available, such that the data which we have can be basically implementable in the use of statistical process control capability methods which you are going to implement. A list of opportunities to use the results of the project in other parts of the business should be prepared such that they can be utilized later on also. So, examples of implementation of DMAIC stage would be the DuPont litigation case where it was to develop an efficient process to allow timely access to needed documents with minimal error. So, basically it was to define rapid and error free access to needed documents. The project teams basically had the process owners, legal subject matter experts, information system specialists, and the focus was basically to reduction of the cycle time, reduction of the errors, elimination of non value added process activities and reduction of costs. So, the last one basically to started by mapping the entire document production process. So, even though this slides which I have been discussing in the last 5 or 6 minutes, I am basically going a little bit fast, but the main emphasis is that if you read the actual pages from Montgomery, you will understand the overall concept of philosophy based on which you are trying to implement the course is basically based on the fact that quality is again I am repeating is an integral part, and it should be implementable in such a way that they are very logical steps based on which we can take corrective actions to understand whether quality improvements is necessary, and if it is necessary how it can be done step by step such that it has basically a scientific implication, and also the persons or the set of team who are there to implement quality are also in line with the overall process implementation of how you are basically trying to improve quality for both the production stage as well as for the services stage. With this I will end this lecture and continue our discussion about total quality management later on also. Thank you very much and have a nice day.